What are we going to do if Florida loses to Vanderbilt this weekend? Now, they're an 18.5-point favorite. The game's at home, comes on 4 in the afternoon. It's either ESPN or SEC Network, I can't remember which, but an embarrassing performance last weekend by Florida, no doubt. They got big boy. They got bullied. They got put on roller skates. They got pushed around. They really got beat up and made to look really bad. Particularly the whole run defense thing and Ray Davis just 200-something yards in the first half, almost 300 yards overall. It was a pretty bad look. It was a pretty bad look for Florida. I know they lost to Vandy last year. That was on the road, different teams. Vandy's not very good. Now, I'm going to say, well, Vandy's never very good. They might be worse than last year. They're definitely not as good as I thought they would be this season. I thought Vandy had potential to maybe make a bowl game, at least go over the 3.5 win mark, which was the Vegas number in the offseason. It looks like that's not even going to happen. They're at 2 wins. They got to win 2 more. I mean, you start looking at Vandy's schedule, this is one of the more likely wins remaining on their schedule, but I'm going to be honest, as funny as it would be, if Florida were to somehow lose this game to Vandy, I don't see it happening. I do not see it happening. I do not think Florida's going to lose this game. I don't. 18.5 points. I mean, it's probably more likely Florida covers than it is Vandy actually wins the game. Now, I'm obviously not convinced that Florida will cover. They're not a great team. They've got issues. We've seen them pop up multiple times this year, particularly in losses on the road at Utah and on the road at Kentucky. But again, what did those 2 games have in common? They were on the road. This is homecoming for Florida. This feels like the closest thing to a must-win game that Billy Napier has had in his first 2 years at Florida. So I can't see it. Look, you know me. I live for the point and laugh special. And the point and laugh would be off the freaking charts if somehow Florida lost this coming weekend to Vandy. I can't pick it to happen. But I want to take the sort of second half of this video and talk about, well, what if they do lose, though? What should happen? Should something drastic happen if Florida drops this game? I mean, it would only be their 3rd loss of the season, but again, you look at their upcoming schedule. Games against LSU, Florida will be an underdog. Games against Florida State, Florida's an underdog there. They have to play on the road at South Carolina. At best right now, that's a 50-50 game for Florida. Mizzou is better than a lot of people thought they would be. And, of course, they got to play Georgia. There's forget the Vandy game for a second. There's 3 or 4 additional losses this season coming up for Florida, whether they win or lose the Vandy game, right? So they're at 3 wins now, 3-2. Okay, skip the Vandy game. They're at 3-2. They're going to lose to, let's say they lose to LSU. That's 3 losses. Georgia, 4 losses. Florida State, 5 losses. Any one other game puts them at 6-6. Any 2 other games puts them at a 7-loss season. I'm on record, I've been on record, that I don't think Billy Napier is getting fired this year at Florida. There was some sort of dark and dire predictions for Florida this offseason and what they might do or not do in terms of an overall record. Some people had them winning 3 and 4 games. I have them hovering around the bowl mark, and they're probably on pace to still get there. I didn't think there was any way he would get fired this year. I've said really since last year, I do think next year is probably Billy Napier's last year at Florida. You talk about this year's schedule. I've talked in the past about next year's schedule for Florida, and the problem is twofold. I don't think Florida's going to be much better of a team next year than they are this year. I just don't. I know they've got a good recruiting class lined up for this December and February. Very few of those players are going to have an impact next year, and that's not a knock on the recruiting class. It's a great recruiting class. It's just that very few freshmen overall are going to impact or contribute right away. And the schedule next year is just absolutely brutal. It's infinitely more difficult than this year's schedule. So all the people that were kind of looking at Florida for a potential 3 or 4 win season this year, I think they were a year early. I think that could possibly come next year. And if that's the case, especially if Billy Napier ends up with a losing record this year, then you're looking at a scenario where where Sunbelt Billy has 3 losing records in a row every season, and I just think Florida would have to fire him at that point next season. I can't imagine a place like Florida keeping a head coach who has had a losing season for 3 years in a row every year he's been there, 3 years. But if they lose this game on Saturday to Vanderbilt, all bets are off in terms of what happens with Billy Napier. Generally speaking, I am dead set against firing a coach in year 2 for any football-related reason. In order to get rid of a coach in the first or second year, I feel like, it needs to be something sort of off-field related, some kind of scandal or something outside of football. But, a bad loss, the Utah loss is excusable. Now, that doesn't mean I expect Florida fans to settle for losing to Utah, but Utah's a pretty good team. I guess you can make that same argument for Kentucky, that Kentucky's a pretty good team too, but the problem is Kentucky and Florida just are not viewed on the same plane when it comes to SEC football. At least they haven't been for the last 30 or 40 years, right? Florida has just been so much better, and right now Florida's looking up at them. So you lose that one, lose that. If they lose to Vandy, all bets are off. I made a joke the other day. If they lose to Vandy, Billy Napier should be fired at the 50-yard line right after the game. I still don't necessarily believe that. I still think it's a bad idea in general to sort of get in the habit of firing coaches 1 or 2 years in for football-related issues, because I feel like it makes it harder to hire somebody, I think, right? Like, who wants to take a job somewhere where they just fired their coach after only 2 seasons for football-related issues? Most coaches want 2, 3, 4 years to get things turned around. The problem is fan expectations aren't aligning with that these days because of the transfer portal, and we've seen other teams make immediate turnarounds, and it hasn't happened at Florida. Year 2 has been a big year for a lot of coaches around the country in the past 5 to 10 years, particularly in the SEC, though you look at what Saban did his second year. In 2008, right? Nearly winning the SEC, lost to a national championship winning Florida team. You look at what Kirby did in year 2, won the SEC and a national title. There's lots of examples that we can go through it, but the point is year 2 is going to be a disaster for Billy Napier, and if they lose at home on homecoming to Vanderbilt, whatever percentage I thought there might have been that Billy Napier was going to get fired this year was very low. 5%, because I just didn't think it's just not going to happen in year 2. If they lose to Vandy, and they go on to lose the games that most people expect them to lose, which will be Georgia, LSU, Florida State, and then they drop an additional game on top of that, and they actually do finish the season missing a bowl. At least last year they made a bowl game. You remember? They had a losing record, but that was after the bowl game, if you remember. So they were 6-6 during the regular season. Then lost to Oregon State in the bowl game. That put them at 6-7, right? If they finish the regular season this year with 4 or 5 wins and don't even make a bowl game, all bets are off. If they think there's a coach out there somewhere that they can go get that's better than Billy Napier, they might make that decision. I don't know. I feel like the majority of Florida fans are still kind of holding on to hope with Billy Napier, but I am curious if there are any Florida fans out there who have had enough now and who would be willing to move on, would be supportive of making a move this year if Florida was able to get maybe a high-profile name or somebody that you want or whatever. You can let me know down below, but it's fun to think about what if, I guess, but I don't think Florida's losing this game to Vandy. I don't. I'd love to be wrong. I'd love to be able to point and laugh Saturday afternoon at a Florida loss and feature Florida on the Your Season Is Over video for the second week in a row. That would be amazing. I can't predict it. I don't think it's going to happen. I actually think Florida wins easily and covers the 18.5. Have a good morning, Florida man.